Whether you're a candidate for financial aid or not, asking about the school's financial aid policies are very important. This allows you to see how much aid is given out each year and how much the school monetarily puts behind students who need extra support. You may also want to know if there is a diversity director or coordinator. For some parents, when they learn that there is an office solely dedicated to matters of inclusion and diversity, that school may actually move to the top of the list. In this regard, please do not hesitate to make an appointment with the director so that you can ask diversity-related questions. These meetings can prove helpful in gaining a deeper understanding of how the diversity myth actually plays a part in admission meetings. We all want to get into our first choice, and that's our hope for our children, and even get into more than one school so that families can actually weigh their options. However, if you are waitlisted, my suggestion is to stay on the wait list, particularly if it's a school, if your top school. Schools often go to the wait list over the summer due to a variety of factors, and staying on that list increases your chances of getting in. If for a reason that your child is deferred, you can also schedule a time to sit down with the admissions committee after the admission season has concluded to get some tips on how to make your application stronger in the future. So the previous slides discussed tips on navigating the prep school admission process. And I just highlighted a few that I think are extremely important for African American parents. But here on the next slide are a few tips for actually navigating the prep school environment. So now that you've gotten in and your children or your child is nestled into their classroom, I have a couple of bullets that I want to discuss with you in depth on how to prepare your child for success in these environments. First is always ask questions. Parents want to be informed not only about how your child is doing academically, but also, and in many ways, most importantly, socially. If you think back a few moments ago to the Zora Hurston quote, into the short 1-minute activity that I had you do, consider that's the environment that your child is going into. We know that 6% are students of color, 6% are African American students in this environment, these prep school environments, and this is across the board. These numbers may fluctuate. You may have more, you may have a little bit less. But it's important that we feel comfortable and that students feel natural to be able to talk to us about the spaces that they occupy in these private schools. We should also create an opportunity for students to talk with us and explore the subtle nuances they experience in the prep school environment, things they hear in the hallway, tiny comments that on the surface don't seem to be painful, but over time could be. Second, get to know your child's teachers and get involved in the school environment. One of the wonderful things about prep schools, both day schools and boarding schools, is the opportunity to get to know your teachers and administrators that your student comes in contact with on a daily basis. Despite the lack of diversity among teaching staff, students still report that they have access to their teachers whenever they need it. Parents should feel comfortable doing the same. Encourage your children to get involved in campus activities. If there are ones that they want to see but don't exist, please encourage them to begin their own. And also to encourage them to seek out faculty members who want to be sponsors. Oftentimes, student groups need to have a faculty sponsor anyway, but it's really important for students to actually find their voice and to seek out those opportunities that they want in their schools. In some cases, multicultural clubs and the like were started by students who recognized the need to have a space to speak candidly about topics related to race and culture. I'll date myself with this statement, but many years ago when I attended my private school, we were approached, we meaning the very few black students that were there, were approached to, and with the question of, did we want to have a multicultural student union or a diversity club? The one lone black faculty member said, no, why would they need something like that? When I've done my dissertation research, I went back to these friends who I'm still very close to discuss this question and discuss this faculty member, our supposed ally's response. And that one response, wounded many of us for a very long time. This faculty member was so concerned and in many ways afraid of being the ally to these black kids coming from the inner cities of New Jersey and New York that he stunted our growth as ethnic beings. I've often thought of that and recounted that story to many children that I come in contact with at these private schools so that they are not afraid to seek out the experiences and the guidance they need. And then last on this slide is be prepared. Continue to stay engaged. It is possible that your child, whether she or he is in lower school, middle school, or upper school, that they will be asked about the black experience by their teachers and their peers. It's possible that your black daughter may be asked about her hair, how often she combs it, how often she washes it, or about their skin color. Does it come off? Does it rub off? Does it wash off? And while these may sound like very silly questions, these questions are still being asked of our black children today in 2011. Now, I was not prepared for those questions. They made me stick out in ways that I was not prepared and I didn't want. In recent conversations with our black students, I've learned that these comments and questions still occur, but students today, while it's still annoying, are better equipped to address them. Now, I think that a lot of this has to do with how parents at home are equipping their students. So my suggestion here is to stay engaged. It has been my experience and through my research that whiteness is a topic that prep schools do not want to address. They simply have never needed to. It's hard to step out of whiteness when you are white because of all the social and the cultural and economic privilege that accompany whiteness. And prep schools have values, have belief systems, privileges, and histories, and modes of operation that have been informed by the majority population. So this is my soapbox tiny moment for you all, is that I truly believe in and believe that prep schools can be wonderful, wonderful places. Prep schools still have challenges around diversity and inclusion, and they are still growing. Parents need to be informed and need to know that their families have every right to be a part of the community. Before I move into just some final thoughts, I've noticed a couple of questions that come up, and let me address those since we have a moment. One question is from Rebecca: how important are affinity groups for black parents? This is a great question. Affinity groups provide parents an opportunity to share strategies about how best to support their children and how to create culturally specific enrichment activities. I've been at several schools where parents of color, particularly black parents, have come together in their own homes, sometimes with their own funds, to provide enrichment activities for their children. It also allows them to get together outside of the school community. Extracurricular activities and sports are absolutely fine, but you almost are allowed to let your hair down and to share strategies when you have a space that's uniquely your own. I would also add to this answer to Rebecca that it's also important to encourage our black students to seek out affinity groups. The National Association of Independent Schools has an annual conference for school heads and administrators. They also have a conference called the People of Color Conference, which 14 or 15 years ago when it first began was literally for people of color and by people of color. Over the last 15 or so years, it's expanded to incorporate allies. So you would see a huge mixture. It's heavily attended. It changes cities every year. And my point in mentioning this is that they began affinity groups. In recent years, those affinity groups have come into contact or conflict, and many whites who would be coming to these People of Color conference felt excluded. Suffice it to say that the National Association of Independent Schools still believes that affinity groups do have a positive impact and effect on black students and students of color in these private spaces. So not only do I think that affinity groups are important for parents, but they're also important for students as well. And the last thing I should say about the affinity groups for parents is that these groups provide, if you will, a unified voice, so that if they wanted to approach administration, perhaps about a new rule or a law or even asking for a new class, they have more of a unified voice and a platform from which to speak when they are in a group. Another question popped up from Aisha. And the question is, how does legacy admission impact admission of diverse students? Oh, wow, that's another good question. Let me repeat that. How does legacy admission impact the admission of a diverse student? Okay. As I mentioned a little earlier, legacy admission is something that we need to contend with at any private school, whether that legacy admission is white legacy or legacy of color. And again, legacies are when a student has a sibling that's already enrolled. But ultimately, schools want to make a good decision about who they admit. They want academically sound students, students that can handle the work, students that have, throughout their admission process, whether it's a lower, middle, or upper, have exhibited an inclination to get socially involved in the school. So looking at all aspects of the child. All that being said, I have actually seen legacy students not be admitted because they can't handle the work or other factors. But I've also seen legacy students that were given preference because of then that they were legacy students and that they were strong students. So there's no really great answer to that question. I think that it's also specific to the admission committee and the actual numbers that are available for that expansion year. There's also, I should have mentioned before, that not only do you see a large number of candidates being offered spaces in the expansion years, you may have movement over the summer in non-expansion years. So example, third grade is not an expansion year, but anything can happen. Parents could move, jobs could change, and there automatically would be 3 or 4 openings, which is wonderful. So that doesn't mean that if it's not an expansion year that you should not apply to your chosen private school or prep school. If there are other questions that we were not able to get to, there are ways that you can contact me. I'm currently editing a collection of narratives that are written by black women who graduated from elite private schools. For more information about the book, which is entitled Colored Me, Black Women Shout from the Ivory Tower, you can visit www.coloredme.com. You can also reach me via email at tiffany@coloredme.com and at Twitter. Thank you so very much for your time and your attendance today. I'm hoping that this webinar provided some insight into the prep school admission process and also provided some tips for navigating the maze. Thank you.